The castle stands on a hill where the wind never seems to rest. Even on quiet evenings when the surrounding forests grow still, the air around the old stone walls seems to whisper, brushing against the towers as if searching for a way inside. Travelers passing along the narrow road below often glance up toward the structure and feel something they cannot quite explain. It is not simply curiosity. It is the strange sense that the building is watching them back. No one living today remembers the castle when it was truly alive. The towers were raised centuries ago, their foundations carved deep into rock long before the nearby town existed. In those days, the castle was not just a home for nobility. It was a fortress, a place designed with intention. Every hallway had a purpose. Every stairway was placed with careful thought. And far beneath the grand halls and decorated chambers that visitors once admired, another part of the castle slowly took shape, a hidden architecture, a second world beneath the stone. If you walk through the castle today, you will first see the parts that were meant to be seen. Wide corridors stretch through the upper floors. Tall windows look out across the hills. The remains of faded tapestries cling to the walls, their colors dulled by centuries of dust and silence. At first glance, nothing about the place seems unusual. It looks like any other ancient fortress that has simply grown old with time. But the deeper you go, the stranger the structure becomes. Near the back of the main hall, there is a narrow staircase that descends into darkness. The steps are worn smooth by countless feet that once passed there, though no records explain why so many people traveled downward instead of upward. The staircase twists slowly through the stone, each step pulling you farther away from the light of the castle above. And then you reach the first chamber. It is a crypt. Rows of stone alcoves line the walls, each one sealed with slabs that bear no names. No dates, no family crests, only blank stone. When historians first documented the castle, they expected to find graves belonging to the noble family who built the fortress. Yet none of the seals carry any markings at all. The silence of the chamber feels deliberate, as though the people buried there were never meant to be remembered. But the crypt is not the most unusual part of the underground structure, because beyond the crypt lies the vault. And the vault was never meant for burial. The entrance to it is hidden behind a wall that appears solid at first glance. Only when the light strikes the stones at a certain angle can you see the outline of a narrow door carved so precisely that it disappears into the masonry. Inside, the passage bends sharply, forcing anyone who enters to turn their back on the crypt before stepping farther underground. Some researchers believe this design was intentional, because once you pass through the hidden doorway, you enter a space that feels completely different from the rest of the castle. The walls are perfectly symmetrical, the ceiling rises into a shallow dome, and the floor is marked with patterns that seem too precise to be decorative. When the first modern survey of the chamber was conducted decades ago, investigators noticed something strange about the layout. The vault is aligned exactly with the cardinal directions. Each corner points perfectly north, south, east, and west. That kind of alignment is rare in medieval architecture, especially in rooms that appear to have no obvious purpose. Yet the builders of the castle clearly designed the vault with intention. At the center of the chamber lies a circular platform carved directly from the stone floor. Around it, narrow channels cut into the rock form geometric shapes that resemble symbols rather than simple decoration. No written records explain what they mean, but anyone standing in the room immediately feels that the space was meant for something more than storage. The vault was designed as a place where people gathered. And whatever they gathered for was important enough to hide beneath layers of stone and secrecy. For centuries, the chamber remained untouched. Dust settled across the floor. The air inside grew stale and heavy. Outside, wars came and went. Kingdoms rose and collapsed. The noble family who once owned the castle vanished from history, leaving only fragments of documents behind. Yet the crypt and the vault remained exactly as they were, waiting. It was not until the early 20th century that anyone began to truly study the underground chambers. A group of historians exploring the castle discovered the hidden doorway behind the crypt wall and followed the narrow corridor into the vault. Their initial reports described the chamber in simple terms, an unusual architectural feature, perhaps used for private ceremonies or secret meetings. But as their research continued, more unsettling details began to emerge. The measurements of the room matched proportions found in ancient ritual sites across Europe. The geometric carvings on the floor aligned with astronomical positions during certain times of the year. And the dome above the chamber seemed designed to carry sound in a very specific way. If someone stood in the center of the platform and spoke in a low voice, the sound echoed along the curved walls and returned to the speaker as a whisper, as though the room itself were responding. Some researchers dismissed these discoveries as coincidence. Others believed the castle's builders had created something far more deliberate, a ritual space. Not for worship in the traditional sense, but for gatherings meant to remain hidden from the world above. And once that possibility entered the investigation, the history of the castle began to look very different. Records that had once seemed insignificant suddenly carried new meaning. Old letters described strange nighttime assemblies in the castle long after the rest of the household had gone to sleep. Servants wrote about hearing footsteps moving toward the lower levels at midnight, followed by hours of silence before the participants returned. And one account mentioned something that historians still debate today. A visitor who stayed at the castle centuries ago wrote that the master of the house once told him the fortress had two hearts, one above ground and one below. The guest reportedly asked what he meant. The master simply smiled and said that some rooms are meant for living and others are meant for remembering. Over time, explorers began spending nights inside the castle, hoping to understand the purpose of the hidden chambers. Most reported nothing unusual beyond the unsettling quiet that seems to fill old buildings after dark, but a few experiences were harder to explain. One researcher working alone in the vault late at night claimed he heard footsteps circling the outer wall of the chamber. When he raised his lantern, the room was empty. Another investigator reported that the air inside the vault sometimes changes temperature suddenly, growing colder near the center platform. Then there was the recording. During an acoustic study meant to test how sound traveled inside the chamber, microphones captured a faint whisper that no one present remembered speaking. When the audio was analyzed later, the words could not be clearly identified. Yet the sound carried the unmistakable rhythm of human speech. The castle's caretakers insist the phenomenon has a simple explanation. Old stone structures often produce strange echoes. Wind passing through narrow corridors can create sounds that resemble voices, and people exploring ancient buildings sometimes allow their imaginations to run away with them. Still, visitors who descend into the crypt and the vault rarely leave feeling unchanged. Something about the architecture creates a sense of presence, not the dramatic kind of fear found in horror stories, but a quieter feeling that the space remembers the people who once gathered there. The central platform remains untouched. The geometric carvings remain sharp despite centuries of wear, and every time someone steps into the vault, the same question returns: what exactly happened here? Who designed this hidden chamber beneath the castle? And why was it important enough to build an entire underground world that ordinary visitors were never meant to see? Because the deeper historians looked into the past of the fortress, the clearer one truth became: the crypt and the vault were not accidents of architecture. They were the heart of something carefully planned, something secret, something that may have shaped the entire purpose of the castle itself. And if that is true, then the most important history of the fortress was never written in the records above ground. It was written in stone beneath the castle, waiting for someone curious enough to descend the staircase and listen to what the silence might still be trying to say. The wind moves strangely around the castle on the hill. Travelers often notice it before they even see the structure itself. The road bends through quiet forest and then slowly rises, and somewhere between the trees, a current of air begins to shift, swirling in small circles across the path. It feels colder there, sharper somehow, like the wind is passing through unseen cracks in the world before touching the ground again. Locals rarely talk about it directly, but many of them have noticed the same thing for generations. The hill where the castle stands never feels completely still. Even on calm evenings when the rest of the valley is quiet, the air around the ancient walls continues to move as if something inside the structure is quietly breathing. From a distance, the castle looks exactly like what people expect from an old fortress. Thick stone walls climb upward into narrow towers. Windows sit deep within the masonry, dark and reflective during the day and nearly invisible at night. The structure was built centuries ago by a powerful family who ruled the surrounding land when the region was still wild and unsettled. Their intention was simple on the surface: protection, wealth, and status. The fortress would demonstrate their strength and provide security against enemies. At least that is what the official records say, but history often tells only part of the truth. What most visitors never realize when they first step inside the castle is that the building was designed with a second purpose. The grand halls, the dining chambers, the sleeping quarters, the towers where guards once stood watch, all of these spaces exist for life above ground. They were meant to be seen. They were meant to impress guests and intimidate rivals. Yet the true mystery of the castle begins far below those rooms. Beneath the stone floors of the main hall lies a hidden network of corridors and chambers carved directly into the rock of the hill. The passageways were constructed during the same period as the fortress itself, but they were never mentioned in the early architectural plans. No maps describe them. No official documents explain their purpose. In fact, for nearly 200 years after the castle was built, most people living there seemed unaware that the underground structure even existed. The first hint of its presence appeared in a strange journal entry written by a servant who worked in the castle during the late 17th century. The servant described hearing footsteps beneath the floor of the great hall late one night. At first, he assumed someone was moving furniture in a storage room below, but when he asked the other workers about it the next morning, they insisted there was no room beneath the hall at all. The castle was built directly on solid stone. The servant wrote that he knew what he heard: slow footsteps, measured and deliberate, moving somewhere beneath the ground. The journal entry might have been dismissed as imagination if not for the second account recorded several years later by a traveling scholar who stayed at the castle while documenting the region's architecture. One evening, while exploring the fortress, he noticed something unusual in the far corner of the main hall. One of the stone tiles in the floor sounded hollow when tapped. Curious, the scholar examined the surrounding area more closely and discovered faint scratches along the edge of the tile, as though it had been lifted many times before. With the help of a servant, he pried the stone upward. Beneath it was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The discovery shocked everyone in the castle. The staircase had clearly existed for generations, yet no one living there claimed to know about it. The steps were worn smooth with age, suggesting that many people had once used the passage. But who those people were, and why they had hidden the entrance so carefully, remained unanswered. The scholar descended first, holding a lantern that cast long trembling shadows against the stone walls. The staircase spiraled downward farther than expected, twisting through layers of rock that felt colder with every step. The air grew heavier, almost damp, carrying a faint mineral smell that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. When he finally reached the bottom, the passage opened into a large underground chamber. At first glance, the room appeared to be a crypt. Stone alcoves lined the walls, each sealed with smooth slabs carved without names or markings. Dozens of them stretched around the chamber in silent rows. The scholar assumed these were burial spaces belonging to the noble family that once ruled the castle. Yet the absence of inscriptions puzzled him. Wealthy families almost always marked their tombs with elaborate carvings and symbols of status. Here there was nothing, just blank stone. As if the identities of the dead were meant to remain hidden. The discovery alone would have been enough to make the crypt a historical curiosity, but the scholar soon realized the chamber contained something even more unusual. At the far end of the room, partially concealed behind a narrow stone column, he noticed a faint seam running vertically through the wall. When he placed his lantern closer, the outline of a door became visible. The door had been cut so precisely that the edges blended perfectly into the surrounding masonry. Without the correct angle of light, it was almost impossible to see. The scholar called for the servant to help him push against the stone. After several minutes of effort, the hidden doorway slowly shifted. Behind it lay another corridor descending even deeper beneath the castle. This second passage felt different from the first. The walls were smoother, more carefully finished, and the air inside carried a strange stillness that made every footstep echo softly ahead. The corridor bent sharply after a few meters, forcing anyone walking through it to turn completely away from the crypt. And then the passage opened into the vault. The chamber was unlike anything the scholar had ever seen in medieval architecture. Instead of rough stone walls or burial niches, the vault formed a nearly perfect circular room. The ceiling curved upward into a shallow dome that reflected the lantern's light across smooth surfaces carved with remarkable precision. At the center of the floor stood a raised platform shaped like a wide disc, its edges decorated with thin channels cut into geometric patterns. The entire space felt deliberate, measured, designed. The scholar spent hours studying the room that night. As he moved the lantern around the edges of the chamber, he noticed that the carvings on the floor aligned with the 4 directions of the compass. When he stood on the central platform and spoke, the dome above carried his voice outward so clearly that the echoes seemed almost like whispers returning from the walls. It did not feel like a burial chamber. It felt like a place built for gatherings, yet no records explained who gathered there, or why they needed a hidden chamber beneath a crypt beneath a castle. When the scholar returned to the surface the next morning, he asked the lord of the castle about the underground rooms. The nobleman listened quietly while the discovery was described in detail. Then he smiled in a way the scholar later described as both polite and mysterious. The lord said the castle had many old features whose purposes had been forgotten. Some rooms, he explained, belonged to earlier generations. Some secrets, he suggested, were best left where they were. The conversation ended there, but the scholar could not forget the strange design of the vault. Over the following days, he returned to the chamber repeatedly, measuring the carvings and studying the proportions of the room. Slowly, he began to notice patterns that made the structure even more puzzling. The geometric lines on the floor were not random decoration. When traced carefully, they formed shapes that appeared to correspond with positions of the stars visible during certain nights of the year. It was as though the builders had created a map of the sky beneath the earth. Why anyone would do such a thing inside a hidden vault remained a mystery. The scholar eventually left the castle and continued his travels, but his journal preserved the first detailed description of the underground structure. Centuries later, historians rediscovered his writings and returned to investigate the fortress themselves. What they found confirmed every part of the account. The staircase beneath the hall still existed. The crypt still held its silent rows of blank tombs, and the hidden doorway still led to the strange circular vault carved deep inside the hill. Yet the more researchers studied the chambers, the more questions emerged. Because the architecture suggested something far more deliberate than a forgotten burial site, the crypt appeared to serve as a barrier, a threshold separating the world of the living above from the unknown purpose of the vault below. Anyone traveling downward had to pass through the silent presence of the tombs before reaching the chamber beyond. Some historians believe this design carried symbolic meaning. The builders may have intended the crypt to represent a kind of transition, forcing participants in whatever gatherings occurred there to confront the idea of mortality before entering the inner space. If that interpretation is correct, then the vault itself may have served a far deeper role in the hidden life of the castle, and the secrets of that role might still be written in the geometry carved into the stone floor. Because when modern researchers finally mapped the chamber using precise instruments, they discovered something that the original scholar could not have measured centuries earlier. The central platform sits exactly at the intersection of several lines pointing toward significant astronomical events, positions where the sun and certain stars rise or set during specific days of the year. This was not accidental construction, it was careful planning. Someone had designed the vault to function as more than just a hidden room. It was meant to become a space where architecture, sound, and celestial alignment all worked together. And once that realization emerged, historians began to reconsider the entire history of the castle. Perhaps the fortress had never been only a military stronghold. Perhaps its builders had always intended the hill to house something else. Something private, something ritualistic, something that required secrecy so complete that even the servants living above ground would never know what occurred beneath their feet. But the most unsettling discovery came when researchers examined the crypt again, because although the tombs appeared sealed for centuries, one of the stone slabs showed signs of being moved many times over the years, not recently, but repeatedly, as if someone had continued visiting the underground chambers long after the original builders were gone, and that raises a question historians still debate today. If the castle's hidden vault truly served a ritual purpose long ago, who kept returning to it after the world above had forgotten? And more importantly, why? The scholars who returned to study the castle decades later often described a strange feeling the moment they stepped into the crypt. It was not fear in the usual sense. The chamber was quiet, still, and almost peaceful in its silence. Yet something about the arrangement of the stone alcoves created an odd sense of observation, as though the room itself had been designed to guide attention toward the hidden doorway beyond. When lantern light moved across the smooth slabs sealing the tombs, the shadows between them formed dark vertical shapes that resembled silent figures standing along the walls. Some researchers dismissed the sensation as imagination. Others believed the crypt had been intentionally designed to create that psychological effect. The rows of blank tombs forced anyone passing through to confront the presence of death before entering the vault. It was a passage not only through stone corridors but through symbolism, life above ground, memory in the crypt, and something unknown beyond the hidden door. When the research team began mapping the underground structure in greater detail, they discovered the layout was far more complex than originally believed. The circular vault at the center was only the main chamber. Narrow corridors branched away from it in 4 directions, each one leading to smaller rooms carved into the rock. These side chambers were much plainer than the vault itself. Their walls were rougher, their ceilings lower, and the air inside them felt colder. At first the rooms appeared empty, but careful examination revealed faint marks carved into the stone floors, shapes that seemed deliberate though worn by centuries of time. The carvings resembled geometric patterns similar to those found in the central vault, though much smaller. Some historians speculated that these rooms may have served as preparation areas for gatherings that took place in the main chamber. Others believed they were meant for private reflection or study before participants entered the central space. What made the design especially intriguing was the symmetry. Each corridor extended outward at almost exactly the same angle. Each side chamber mirrored the others in size and shape. The entire underground structure formed a pattern resembling a cross with the circular vault at its center. The arrangement suggested a system. Not random architecture, but something organized with careful thought. One researcher studying the layout proposed an unusual theory. He believed the underground chambers functioned like stages in a ritual journey. Anyone entering the hidden staircase would first descend from the world above into the crypt, passing through the silent presence of the tombs. From there, they would reach the hidden doorway and enter the vault, where the central platform served as the focal point for whatever ceremonies were held there. But before stepping onto that platform, participants may have moved through the side chambers in a specific sequence: preparation, reflection, observation of the sky through calculations marked into the stone. Only then would they gather in the central vault. The theory gained attention because it explained something else researchers had noticed about the chamber's acoustic design. When several people stood around the edges of the circular room and one person spoke from the central platform, the shape of the dome carried the voice outward so clearly that every word seemed to surround the listeners at once. The effect was powerful, almost theatrical. A single speaker could address an entire group while standing alone at the center. It was as if the room itself had been designed to focus attention on whoever stood upon that platform. What purpose such gatherings served remained impossible to prove. No written records from the castle's early years described events beneath the ground. The noble family who built the fortress disappeared from historical documents after several generations, leaving only scattered references in regional archives. Yet some fragments of information survived. One particularly curious document was a letter written by a visiting merchant who stayed at the castle in the early 18th century. The letter described an evening during which several members of the household gathered quietly after midnight and moved toward the lower halls carrying lanterns. The merchant followed them at a distance, believing they were inspecting wine storage areas. Instead, he watched them open a section of the floor and descend into the hidden staircase. The merchant admitted that curiosity tempted him to follow further, but something about the seriousness of the group made him hesitate. He returned to his room and listened instead. According to his account, faint echoes of voices rose through the stone floor hours later, not loud, not frantic, just steady conversations spoken in low tones. The voices continued until nearly dawn. When the group finally returned upstairs, the merchant noticed they appeared calm and thoughtful rather than exhausted. He asked one of the servants the next day where the gathering had taken place. The servant reportedly responded with a simple answer: "In the lower rooms where the castle remembers." No explanation followed. The phrase became famous among historians centuries later when the merchant's letter was rediscovered in an archive. Many researchers believe the servant's words reveal something important about the purpose of the underground chambers. The vault may not have been intended as a place of fear or danger. Instead, it might have served as a space where certain members of the household gathered for philosophical discussion, symbolic ceremonies, or reflections tied to the cycles of the stars. In other words, the chamber could have been a private ritual space, a hidden sanctuary where knowledge and tradition were preserved beyond the view of ordinary life in the castle above. If that interpretation is correct, it would explain why the architecture of the vault appears so carefully aligned with astronomical positions. During specific nights of the year, the patterns carved into the floor correspond with the rising or setting positions of certain stars visible through the castle's upper windows. Participants might have gathered below, while observers above watched the sky. Signals could have been passed through the hidden corridors to mark the exact moment when celestial alignments occurred. When those moments arrived, the person standing on the central platform would speak. Their voice carried through the dome. Their words echoed around the chamber, and the participants standing along the circular wall would listen. This theory remains impossible to prove, yet it fits many of the architectural clues found within the underground structure. It also explains something else that explorers often describe when visiting the vault today. The room feels strangely balanced. Even after centuries of abandonment, standing at the center of the platform creates an unusual sensation of symmetry and focus. The walls curve evenly around the space. The lines carved into the floor guide the eye outward in perfect geometry. The dome above reflects sound in soft waves that return to the speaker like distant whispers. The effect can make visitors feel as though they are part of something larger than themselves. Some describe it as peaceful, others say it feels unsettling, but almost everyone agrees on one point. The chamber was built with extraordinary intention. Years passed while historians continued studying the site, documenting every detail they could find. Their work slowly transformed the mysterious castle from a forgotten ruin into one of the region's most fascinating historical locations. Yet the deeper they investigated the underground chambers, the more they realized the vault's story might not have ended when the noble family disappeared, because scattered evidence suggested the space had been visited long after the castle itself was abandoned. One clue appeared in the form of wax residue found near the edge of the central platform. Chemical analysis revealed that the wax came from candles produced several centuries after the original construction of the castle. Another clue emerged when researchers noticed faint scratches near the hidden doorway connecting the crypt to the vault. The marks were subtle, but they indicated that the door had been opened repeatedly over many years. Someone had continued entering the chamber, someone who knew exactly where the hidden passage was located. The idea that unknown visitors might have used the vault long after the castle's decline added a new layer of mystery to the site. Who were these people? Were they scholars drawn to the strange design of the chamber, travelers who had heard rumors of the underground rooms, or perhaps individuals who believed the vault still held a deeper purpose connected to its original construction? No one could say for certain, but the possibility that the chamber had remained active for centuries made the castle's story far more complicated than anyone expected. And then, one evening during a routine survey of the crypt, researchers discovered something that changed their understanding of the underground structure entirely. One of the blank tomb slabs was slightly misaligned, not broken, not damaged, simply shifted a few centimeters away from its original position. At first, the team assumed the stone had moved naturally over time due to temperature changes or settling of the foundation. But when they examined it more closely, they noticed something unusual. The slab was not sealed to the wall. It could slide, carefully, almost like a door. When the researchers pushed against the stone, it moved inward with a low grinding sound. Behind it, they found a narrow cavity extending deeper into the rock than any of the other burial spaces. Inside the cavity lay a small stone box. The box had no decoration except for a single geometric symbol carved into its lid. The shape matched one of the patterns found in the floor of the vault. With great caution, the researchers opened it. Inside, they discovered a collection of objects wrapped in brittle cloth, old coins, fragments of parchment, and a small metal instrument shaped like a compass. The instrument did not point north. Instead, its needle rotated slowly until it aligned with the same geometric symbol carved into the lid of the box. The discovery stunned the research team because it suggested that whoever built the underground chambers had left behind tools meant to interact with the patterns carved into the vault floor, tools meant to guide movement, position, possibly even timing. The castle's hidden architecture was no longer just a curiosity, it was a system, and that system hinted at rituals far more intricate than anyone had imagined. But one question remained unanswered. If the builders had gone to such lengths to create this underground space, why hide the key to understanding it inside a tomb where it might never be found, unless the tomb was never meant to remain sealed forever? Unless someone at some point in the future was expected to open it again and follow the path into the vault, to continue whatever purpose the chamber was originally built to serve. The researchers studying the castle realized that their investigation had only just begun, because the discovery of the stone box proved one undeniable truth. The crypt and the vault were not simply remnants of forgotten history. They were part of a design that had waited centuries beneath the castle hill, waiting for someone curious enough to uncover it, and perhaps to complete it. The discovery of the stone box changed the atmosphere of the investigation almost immediately. Until that moment, the underground chambers had been viewed mostly as an architectural mystery. Strange, yes, intriguing, certainly, but still part of a distant past that no longer touched the present. The moment the box was opened and the strange compass-like instrument was lifted into the lantern light, that comfortable distance disappeared. Suddenly, the vault beneath the castle no longer felt like a relic of history. It felt like something designed to be used. The metal instrument was surprisingly well preserved. Its surface carried the faint green tint of aged copper, but the mechanism still moved smoothly. When the researchers tilted it gently, the needle spun freely for a moment before settling again toward the same carved symbol that appeared on the lid of the stone box. One of the historians placed the instrument carefully on the ground and compared its alignment to the markings etched into the floor of the vault. They matched, not perfectly at first glance, but when the instrument was positioned at the center of the circular platform, the needle lined up exactly with one of the geometric channels cut into the stone. That channel extended outward toward the eastern side of the chamber before branching into a smaller pattern that resembled a triangular shape. The discovery sparked hours of quiet discussion. Some researchers believed the instrument was nothing more than a symbolic object used in ceremonies. Others argued that its precision suggested a practical purpose. The builders of the vault had clearly invested enormous effort in aligning the chamber with astronomical positions and directional geometry. The instrument might have been intended to help participants locate specific points on the floor during those gatherings. As the lantern light moved across the stone surface, the carved channels seemed almost alive with shadow. The narrow grooves intersected in patterns that were difficult to fully understand when viewed from a single position. But when one of the researchers climbed onto a low stone ledge and looked down at the chamber from above, the design became clearer. The floor was not decorated randomly. The entire vault formed a map. Lines connected the outer walls of the chamber to the central platform. Smaller shapes intersected the larger lines at carefully measured angles. When viewed from above, the design resembled a star-like structure spreading outward from the center of the room. If the compass instrument pointed to one of those lines, it might have been used to guide someone standing on the platform to a precise location. That realization created a quiet sense of anticipation among the team. For centuries, the chamber had existed in silence. Now, piece by piece, its hidden system was beginning to reveal itself. One of the researchers suggested an experiment. They placed the instrument at the center of the platform and allowed the needle to settle into its natural position. Then they stood along the line indicated by the needle, exactly where the geometric channel pointed toward the eastern side of the vault. Another researcher moved to a second line intersecting the first at a narrow angle. When they spoke, the acoustic effect of the chamber changed. The echoes carried differently across the dome. Their voices no longer returned as simple reflections of sound. Instead, the echoes moved along the curved ceiling and met at a point near the western wall before dispersing again. The effect was subtle but unmistakable. It was as though the room itself responded to where people stood. The possibility that the vault had been designed for coordinated positioning fascinated the team. If several participants stood along different lines of the floor pattern, their voices might combine within the dome to create specific acoustic effects. Sound waves could intersect, amplify, or redirect depending on the arrangement of people in the chamber. The builders of the vault had not simply created a room, they had created an instrument made of stone. And the people who gathered there long ago may have used that instrument in ways no modern visitor fully understood. Over the following weeks, the researchers conducted dozens of careful experiments within the chamber. They mapped the exact angles of the floor carvings and recorded how sound traveled through the dome when speakers stood at different points. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Certain positions on the floor created clear echoes. Others caused voices to blend together in a soft resonance that filled the entire chamber. A few locations produced something even stranger. When someone spoke from the central platform, while another person stood along the eastern line indicated by the compass instrument, the dome carried a faint second echo that seemed to return several seconds later from the opposite side of the room. The effect was haunting. It sounded almost like a reply. No one believed the room was literally producing voices, of course. The phenomenon could be explained by the curved surfaces of the dome and the reflective qualities of the stone. Yet the psychological impact of the sound was powerful. Standing in the chamber while the delayed echo returned across the darkness made it feel as though the vault itself had joined the conversation. That realization led the team to reconsider another aspect of the underground structure, the crypt. Until now, the crypt had been viewed simply as a burial chamber or symbolic threshold separating the world above from the vault below. But if the builders had placed so much attention on acoustic effects within the circular room, perhaps the crypt also served a functional purpose. To test this idea, the researchers repeated their experiments while one person stood in the crypt above the hidden doorway. The results surprised everyone involved. Even though the crypt and the vault were separated by thick layers of stone, faint vibrations traveled upward through the floor. When someone spoke from the central platform in the vault, the person standing among the tombs could feel a slight tremor beneath their feet. The sound itself was nearly impossible to hear clearly in the crypt, but the vibration was unmistakable. It suggested that whatever occurred in the vault could be sensed above it, not heard in detail, but felt. One of the historians studying the site later wrote that this discovery changed the way he imagined the castle's hidden gatherings. The crypt may not have been intended only as a symbolic passage. It could have served as an observation space for individuals who remained separate from the central ritual below. Perhaps those standing among the tombs could sense when specific moments occurred in the vault beneath them. Moments marked by sound, moments marked by movement, moments that signaled the progression of whatever ceremony once took place inside the circular chamber. The more the researchers studied the design, the more they realized the entire underground structure worked as a single system. The staircase guided participants downward. The crypt created a threshold of silence and reflection. The hidden doorway separated the outer world from the inner chamber, and the vault itself formed the heart of the experience. Everything was arranged with extraordinary care, yet one mystery still lingered at the center of their investigation. Why had the builders hidden the compass instrument inside a tomb? The object clearly belonged to the system of the vault. It aligned with the floor carvings and helped reveal the chamber's geometric structure. Placing it within a sealed crypt suggested that it had been deliberately concealed at some point in the past. Perhaps it was hidden during a period of danger. Perhaps someone wanted to ensure the knowledge of the vault could not be used again, or perhaps the instrument had been placed there as a final safeguard, a key waiting to be rediscovered by those who came after. Late one evening, after most of the team had left the castle for the night, two researchers remained in the vault reviewing their measurements. Their lanterns cast long shadows across the stone floor, while the quiet of the underground chambers wrapped around them like a heavy curtain. One of them stood on the central platform, holding the compass instrument loosely in his hand. The needle rotated slowly, as always, before settling into its familiar alignment. The researcher placed the instrument on the stone and stepped along the eastern line it indicated. His colleague moved toward another position near the southern wall. They had performed this arrangement many times already during their experiments, but that night something unexpected happened. When the researcher on the platform spoke, the echo returned not once but twice. The first reflection came from the dome as usual, the second came several seconds later, and the third seemed to come from somewhere beyond the vault itself. The sound was faint, almost impossible to hear clearly, yet both men froze at the same moment, because the third echo did not match the pattern they had recorded during previous experiments. It came from deeper within the rock, from somewhere behind the western wall of the chamber. For a long moment neither of them moved. The lantern light flickered gently against the stone as the echoes faded into silence. Then one of the researchers walked slowly toward the wall where the sound had returned. He raised his lantern and studied the surface carefully. At first, the masonry appeared solid, just like the rest of the chamber. But after several minutes of examination, he noticed something unusual. A faint line ran horizontally across the wall at shoulder height. Not a crack, not a natural seam in the rock, a perfectly straight line. As though two sections of stone had been joined together. The discovery sent a quiet thrill through both men. If the vault contained another hidden doorway, one that had remained sealed for centuries, it could lead to parts of the castle's underground structure no one had ever seen. And if the builders had gone to such lengths to conceal that passage, then whatever lay beyond it might reveal the final purpose of the crypt and the vault themselves. The researchers exchanged a silent glance. For weeks they had studied the chamber as historians. Now they stood on the edge of becoming explorers, because somewhere beyond that wall, hidden deeper within the hill, the castle might still be guarding its greatest secret. And the echoes in the vault had just revealed the path toward it. For several long moments, the two researchers simply stared at the wall. The lantern light trembled slightly in the still air, making the faint horizontal seam appear and disappear across the stone surface. At first it looked like nothing more than a natural line in the masonry, but the longer they studied it, the more deliberate it seemed. The seam ran perfectly straight for nearly 3 meters before vanishing into the curved wall of the vault. One of the men pressed his palm against the stone. It felt cold, smoother than the surrounding surface. He tapped it lightly with the metal base of the lantern. The sound that came back was dull and heavy, almost identical to the rest of the wall. Yet when he moved a few steps to the side and tapped again, the echo shifted slightly, just enough to suggest that something behind the stone might not be solid rock. The second researcher stepped closer, curiosity overtaking hesitation. "Try the compass," he said quietly. The instrument was still resting on the central platform where it had been placed earlier. When the first researcher picked it up, the needle spun slowly before settling once again toward the same geometric direction it always chose. He carried the device to the wall and held it near the faint seam. For a moment nothing happened. Then the needle trembled, not wildly, not dramatically, but enough to make both men lean closer. Instead of pointing toward the eastern line on the vault floor as usual, the needle slowly shifted several degrees toward the wall itself. It hovered there, quivering gently, as if reacting to something hidden beyond the stone. Neither man spoke. The silence of the chamber seemed heavier now, filled with the strange awareness that the vault might not be the final room beneath the castle after all. Carefully they examined the seam again, tracing its length with their fingertips. Near the center of the line, one of them discovered a shallow indentation carved into the stone. It was barely visible, little more than a narrow groove shaped like a small triangle. The shape matched one of the symbols etched into the floor of the vault. That was the moment they understood. The compass was not only a guide for positioning people inside the chamber, it was also a key. The researcher placed the tip of the compass needle into the triangular groove. The instrument fit almost perfectly, as though the indentation had been designed specifically for it. When he pushed gently, the needle sank deeper into the stone until a quiet click echoed through the vault. Both men froze. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then a low grinding sound rolled through the chamber as a section of the western wall slowly shifted inward. Dust drifted from the edges of the stone as the hidden panel moved aside, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness beyond. The air that flowed from the opening felt colder than the rest of the vault, carrying a faint scent of mineral earth and something older, something that had been sealed away for a very long time. Neither researcher had expected the discovery to happen so quickly. The castle had already surprised them many times during their investigation, but the idea that an entire hidden passage lay beyond the vault felt almost unreal. For centuries, historians had believed the underground structure ended with the circular chamber. Now the hill itself seemed to be opening further, revealing another layer of its carefully guarded design. The corridor beyond the wall was narrow, just wide enough for a single person to walk through comfortably. Its ceiling sloped downward slightly, forcing anyone entering to lower their head as they stepped inside. Unlike the polished surfaces of the vault, the walls here were rougher, carved directly from the natural rock of the hill, yet the passage was unmistakably intentional. Chisel marks ran along the stone at regular intervals, evidence that someone had shaped the corridor with purpose rather than simply digging a tunnel. The floor slanted gently downward, leading deeper beneath the castle. The researchers exchanged a glance before lifting their lanterns and stepping forward. The moment they crossed the threshold, the hidden wall slowly slid back into place behind them with another heavy grind of stone. The sound echoed through the passage like distant thunder before fading into silence. Now the vault was sealed once again, and they were alone in the deeper part of the castle's underground world. The corridor extended for nearly 20 meters before widening into another chamber. This room was smaller than the vault, but far more mysterious. Instead of a circular shape, the space formed a long rectangle with tall walls rising into shadow above. At the center of the floor stood a stone table carved from a single block of rock. The table was covered in markings. Dozens of symbols filled its surface, etched into the stone with careful precision. Some resembled the geometric shapes found in the vault. Others were more complex, almost like diagrams or maps drawn in lines that intersected and spiraled across the table's length. But what caught the researchers' attention most was the ceiling above the table. Small circular openings had been carved through the rock, forming narrow shafts that extended upward toward the surface of the hill. Through those shafts, faint traces of moonlight filtered down, creating thin beams of pale silver that touched the stone table in specific places. The beams formed a pattern, and that pattern aligned perfectly with the carvings on the table below. One of the researchers felt a slow realization spreading through his mind. "This isn't just another room," he whispered. "It's part of the same system." The shafts in the ceiling acted like ancient sight lines, allowing observers inside the chamber to track the movement of the moon and stars above the castle. When the moon passed certain positions in the sky, its light would fall through the openings and illuminate different symbols on the stone table. The builders of the castle had created a kind of underground observatory. But instead of pointing telescopes toward the heavens, they had carved the sky's movements directly into the architecture of the hill. The room connected everything: the astronomical alignments in the vault, the geometric patterns on the floor, the compass instrument hidden in the crypt. Each piece formed part of a single design, a ritual space built around the relationship between the earth below and the sky above. The researchers stood silently in the chamber for a long time, studying the symbols illuminated by the moonlight. It became clear that the builders had intended participants in the vault to follow specific patterns of movement and speech during particular celestial events. When the stars aligned in certain ways, observers in this deeper chamber would watch the beams of light strike the table and signal the gathering above. Those signals would tell the people in the vault exactly when to begin the next stage of their ritual. The entire underground structure functioned like a living clock tied to the movements of the heavens. And suddenly, the phrase written in the old servant's account centuries earlier made perfect sense. The castle had two hearts, one above ground, and one below. The heart beneath the hill was not simply a room. It was a system designed to measure time, sound, and position all at once. Yet as the researchers continued exploring the chamber, they noticed something that made the discovery even more unsettling. Along the far wall of the room stood several narrow alcoves carved into the rock. Unlike the empty burial spaces in the crypt, these alcoves contained objects, small stone bowls, fragments of metal instruments, and thin strips of parchment so fragile they crumbled at the edges when touched. The parchments were covered in faded writing and diagrams similar to the symbols on the stone table. Though the text had become difficult to read after centuries underground, a few words remained visible, words that seemed to describe cycles, positions, moments when the sky above the castle reached particular alignments, moments when the gathering in the vault was meant to begin. The researchers realized they were looking at instructions, guides left behind by the builders of the underground chambers. Instructions that explained how the ritual space was meant to function. But one detail in those instructions troubled them deeply. Several passages referred to something called the final alignment, an event described as the moment when the system of the crypt, the vault, and the observatory chamber would all work together for a single purpose. The texts did not explain what that purpose was, only that the alignment occurred very rarely, once every several generations, and when it arrived, the participants within the vault were meant to stand in specific positions around the central platform, positions marked by the same geometric lines the researchers had already mapped. The compass instrument would guide them, the echoes of their voices would carry through the dome, and the light from the sky above would signal the precise moment when the final part of the ritual could begin. Standing in the dim chamber beneath the hill, surrounded by the ancient instructions carved into stone and parchment, the researchers felt a quiet chill run through them. Because according to the calculations on the table, the next final alignment was not centuries away. It was approaching, slowly, but inevitably, and for the first time in hundreds of years, the hidden architecture beneath the castle was no longer silent history. It was a system waiting to be completed, waiting for someone to stand once more in the vault above, waiting for the voices to rise into the dome, waiting for the echoes to return. And when that moment came, the castle's hidden heart beneath the hill would awaken again. For several minutes, neither researcher spoke. The chamber felt different from the vault above it. The circular room had an atmosphere of design and balance, but this deeper space carried something heavier. The beams of moonlight that slipped through the narrow shafts in the ceiling moved slowly across the carved stone table, shifting the illuminated symbols little by little as the night progressed. It was impossible to ignore the implication of the writings they had found. The builders of the castle had not simply created a hidden ritual space. They had created a system tied to time itself, one that depended on the movement of the sky and the careful arrangement of people within the vault above. The researchers moved slowly around the room, careful not to disturb the fragile parchment fragments resting in the alcoves. Some of the diagrams appeared to show the layout of the underground chambers, though the drawings were simplified compared to the structure they had already explored. Lines represented the staircase, the crypt, the vault, and the chamber they now stood in. At the center of the drawing was a small circle marked with the same triangular symbol that appeared on the compass instrument. One of the researchers noticed something else. Near the edge of the table, a series of carved lines formed what looked like a calendar. Small marks divided the stone into repeating cycles, each one corresponding to the movement of the moon across the sky. The pattern stretched across decades, but near the end of the carving, one section was marked differently. A deeper groove surrounded several symbols clustered together. That groove pointed directly to the current year. The realization caused a quiet tension to settle in the room. If the calendar on the table truly marked the timing of the final alignment described in the parchments, then the event was not some distant occurrence that might never return. It was something that the builders of the system had predicted with remarkable accuracy, something that was approaching now. The researchers exchanged uneasy glances. They had come to the castle to study history. Instead, they were standing inside a mechanism that appeared to be counting down to a moment that had not yet happened. The silence in the chamber stretched on as they studied the carvings more carefully. Eventually, one of them spoke. What if this place was never meant to stay hidden forever? The question lingered in the air. The system they had uncovered seemed too precise, too deliberate, to simply disappear when the castle fell into decline centuries ago. The instructions carved into the stone suggested that whoever built the underground chambers expected future generations to return, perhaps not immediately, but eventually. The builders may have believed that knowledge preserved in architecture would outlast written records. Even if the world above the castle forgot the purpose of the vault, the system itself would remain intact beneath the hill. And when the time came, someone curious enough might rediscover it, just as the two researchers had done. The thought made the room feel colder. They carefully copied several of the carvings into their notebooks before leaving the chamber and returning through the narrow passage toward the vault. When they stepped back into the circular room, the familiar symmetry of the space felt almost comforting compared to the unsettling discovery below. The hidden wall slid closed behind them once again as they removed the compass instrument from the triangular groove. The vault returned to silence, yet now the chamber seemed different. The researchers could no longer see it as just an intriguing historical structure. Every carved line on the floor, every echo in the dome, every shadow along the curved walls now carried new meaning. The room was part of something larger, something that extended deeper beneath the castle, and possibly deeper into time. They left the underground chambers late that night and sealed the staircase behind them. For several days afterward, they said little about what they had found while they organized their notes and recordings. When they finally shared their discoveries with the rest of the research team, the reaction was a mixture of excitement and skepticism. Some historians believed the carvings were simply symbolic artifacts of medieval philosophy. Others thought the underground observatory had been used to study astronomy in an age before modern instruments. But a few members of the team could not ignore the pattern of evidence. The crypt, the vault, and the hidden chamber all formed a connected system. The compass instrument served as both guide and key, and the calendar carved into the stone table suggested that a specific celestial alignment was approaching. No one suggested completing the ritual described in the parchments. That idea remained unspoken, lingering quietly in the back of everyone's mind. The researchers were scholars, not participants in ancient ceremonies. Still, the thought persisted. If the builders of the castle had intended for voices to echo through the vault during that rare alignment, then the system beneath the hill might never function again unless someone stood there when the moment arrived. The idea was both fascinating and unsettling. Weeks passed as the team continued documenting the underground chambers. Word of the discovery slowly spread through academic circles, attracting historians, architects, and astronomers curious to see the mysterious structure for themselves. Visitors came and went, each one offering their own interpretation of the system, but one detail remained constant. Every expert who studied the carvings on the stone table reached the same conclusion about the calendar. The next alignment described in the chamber would occur within a few months, on a particular night when the moon and several stars would occupy the positions marked in the carvings. As that date approached, the castle began to feel different. The researchers who stayed on the hill during their work often described an unusual quiet settling over the fortress after sunset. The wind still moved around the towers as it always had, but the sound carried an odd rhythm through the empty corridors. Footsteps echoed more clearly in the halls, doors creaked in ways that seemed almost deliberate, and whenever someone descended the staircase into the vault, the chamber felt less like an abandoned space and more like a stage waiting for something to happen. One evening, just days before the predicted alignment, the two researchers who had first discovered the hidden passage returned alone to the underground chambers. They carried only lanterns and their notebooks. When they stepped into the vault, the echoes of their footsteps spread across the dome in soft waves. The geometric patterns on the floor appeared almost luminous in the lantern light. The central platform stood quietly in the middle of the chamber, exactly where it had always been, yet the room no longer felt empty. The researchers stood there for a long time without speaking. Neither of them intended to perform the ritual described in the parchments. Their purpose was simply observation. They wanted to record how the chamber responded when the alignment occurred. Still, as they placed the compass instrument gently on the central platform and watched the needle settle into its familiar direction, a strange thought passed through both of their minds at the same time. For centuries, the castle had waited. Generations had lived and died above the hill without ever knowing what lay beneath their feet. But now the system was awake again. The hidden passage had been opened. The compass had been returned to its place. And the rare alignment of the sky that the builders had predicted so long ago was almost here. Above them, the night slowly deepened. The stars moved quietly across the sky. And somewhere within the ancient design of the crypt, the vault, and the chamber below, time was approaching the moment the castle had been built to remember. The hours passed slowly inside the underground vault. The lanterns cast long, wavering shadows across the curved stone walls, and every small movement created a whisper of echo that drifted upward into the high dome before fading away. The two researchers sat near the outer ring of the chamber, with their notebooks resting on their knees, listening carefully to every sound the room produced. Above them, the castle remained quiet. The heavy stone structure had stood on the hill for centuries, watching storms, wars, and generations of people pass through its halls. Yet beneath that ancient fortress, the hidden chambers seemed to exist in a completely different world. Down here, time moved according to the silent clock carved into the stone table in the deeper chamber. They checked their watches. The alignment was expected sometime after midnight. The stars above the castle were slowly moving into the positions described in the parchments they had studied for weeks. Even though the researchers were determined to remain observers rather than participants, neither of them could ignore the tension building in the quiet chamber. Eventually, one of them stood and walked toward the central platform. The compass instrument still rested there, exactly where they had placed it earlier. The needle remained steady, pointing toward the geometric line etched into the floor. But as he leaned closer, he noticed something subtle. The needle was trembling, not violently, not spinning the way it had when they first carried it through the chambers weeks earlier. Instead, it quivered gently, shifting back and forth by the smallest fraction of a degree. The second researcher stepped closer. "Is it reacting again?" he asked. The first man nodded slowly. "It started a minute ago." They both looked upward toward the curved ceiling of the vault. The dome was smooth and unbroken, yet it carried the faint echoes of the world above. Sometimes when the wind moved across the castle walls, a distant vibration traveled through the stone and whispered down into the chamber. But now the air was completely still. No wind, no movement. Only the quiet tremble of the compass needle. They waited. A few minutes later, something else changed. A faint glow appeared along one of the narrow slits carved into the upper ring of the dome. At first the light was barely visible, like a thin line of pale dust suspended in the air, but gradually it strengthened, becoming a soft silver beam that touched the floor along one of the geometric lines. Moonlight. The researchers immediately turned toward the spot where the beam struck the stone. The carvings on the floor had been designed for this moment. The line of light followed one of the long engraved paths that stretched outward from the central platform. As the moon continued its slow journey across the sky, the beam moved along that path with perfect precision, exactly as the diagrams had predicted. Another few minutes passed. Then a second beam of light appeared on the opposite side of the dome. This one struck a different line on the floor. The two researchers could feel their pulse quickening as they watched the pattern unfold. Every movement of the moon above the castle translated into motion inside the vault. The chamber had become a living map of the sky. The beams crept closer to the center of the room, closer to the platform, closer to the compass. Neither man spoke. They simply observed, recording every detail in their notebooks. Then the compass needle moved, not a small tremble this time. It turned slowly, sliding several degrees away from its usual position before settling into a new alignment that matched the direction of the approaching moonlight. Both researchers stared at it in disbelief. The instrument was responding not just to the architecture of the vault, but to the celestial alignment itself. The system was activating. More light entered the chamber as the moon climbed higher above the hill. The beams from the dome now formed a crossing pattern on the floor, illuminating several of the triangular symbols carved into the stone. One of those beams touched the edge of the central platform. The compass needle shifted again. A faint echo rolled through the dome. At first, the researchers thought it was simply the sound of their own breathing bouncing off the curved walls. But the echo grew stronger, forming a low vibration that hummed through the stone beneath their feet. The chamber was reacting. It was subtle, almost delicate, but unmistakable. The alignment described in the ancient parchments was happening. The two researchers stood frozen near the edge of the platform as the final beam of moonlight slid through the highest slit in the dome. It descended slowly, like a thin silver thread, until it reached the center of the room. The light touched the compass. For a moment nothing happened. Then the needle stopped moving completely, perfectly still. The hum inside the chamber faded into silence. The vault seemed to hold its breath. One of the researchers glanced toward the curved walls, half expecting something dramatic to occur. But the chamber remained calm. The beams of moonlight continued to rest on the carved lines, forming the exact pattern described in the ancient diagrams. The alignment had arrived, yet the ritual itself required something more. The instructions in the parchments had been very clear. Voices. The builders of the castle had intended for people to stand in the positions marked on the floor and speak together, so their echoes would rise into the dome and return through the chamber in carefully controlled patterns. Without those voices, the system remained incomplete. The two researchers exchanged a long, uncertain look. They had promised themselves they would only observe, but now they were standing inside the mechanism at the exact moment it had been designed to function. For centuries, no one had been present when this alignment occurred. The opportunity might never come again in their lifetimes. One of them finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if we only test the echo?" The other man hesitated. Then he slowly nodded. They stepped onto the geometric lines surrounding the platform, positioning themselves on two of the marked triangles carved into the floor. Their footsteps echoed gently through the dome as they moved. The moonlight beams now surrounded them. The compass rested between them on the stone platform, its needle locked in perfect alignment with the glowing lines. The chamber waited. One researcher took a slow breath. Then he spoke a single word. His voice rose into the dome, spreading across the curved ceiling before falling back toward the floor in a wave of echo. The sound did something unexpected. Instead of fading quickly, the echo traveled along the carved lines illuminated by the moonlight. It moved through the chamber like a ripple in water, circling the platform before rising upward again. The second researcher felt the vibration in the stone beneath his feet. The vault was responding. He spoke another word. The two echoes met above the platform and merged. The chamber filled with a deep resonant tone that seemed far larger than the voices that created it. For a brief moment, the entire underground structure felt alive, the crypt above them. The hidden chamber below, every passage and carved wall vibrating softly with the combined sound. Then, just as suddenly, the tone faded. The moonlight shifted slightly. The beams moved past the central platform and continued along the geometric lines toward the outer ring of the vault. The alignment was ending. Within minutes, the chamber returned to stillness. The compass needle slowly drifted back to its original direction. The echoes disappeared into silence. The two researchers stood quietly in the center of the vault, realizing that they had just witnessed something that had not happened for hundreds of years. The system beneath the castle had awakened, if only for a moment. And though they had spoken only a few simple words, the ancient design of the crypt and vault had answered them exactly as its builders had intended centuries before. The hidden architecture beneath the castle had proven something extraordinary. It was not merely symbolic, it was a living structure of sound, light, and time. And now, after centuries of silence, it had remembered how to speak again. The two researchers remained motionless for a long time, letting the resonance of the vault settle into silence around them. The walls seemed colder now, almost as if the chamber itself had exhaled after the brief awakening. They glanced at the compass instrument, still resting on the platform. Its needle had returned to its familiar alignment, but the faint quiver from earlier lingered, almost imperceptible. It was as if the device had absorbed some memory of the event that had just occurred. Slowly, they began to retrace their steps toward the narrow passage that led deeper into the hill, toward the hidden chamber they had discovered weeks earlier. The alcoves with their stone bowls, metal fragments, and parchment strips seemed more mysterious now. The symbols etched into the walls and floor were no longer just historical artifacts. They were active components of a system that had just demonstrated its power. As they examined the alcoves more closely, one of the researchers noticed a small, almost imperceptible door carved into the far wall of the hidden chamber. Unlike the larger panels they had already discovered, this door was tiny and recessed, blending seamlessly with the stone. A faint groove traced its perimeter, suggesting it could be moved or slid open. His pulse quickened as he realized this might be the final secret the builders had hidden away, a chamber even beyond the crypt and the vault. With deliberate caution, he ran his hand along the groove. The stone felt cold, smooth, and unnaturally dry. He pressed gently at the center, where a triangular indentation matched the symbols they had been following throughout the underground system. A soft click echoed, far fainter than the one that had opened the western wall of the vault, yet it carried a weight of finality. The door shifted slightly, revealing a narrow space just large enough for a person to squeeze through. Beyond it, darkness stretched deeper than any chamber they had encountered. The faint scent of earth and stone mingled with something older, something almost metallic, sharp and clean. Neither researcher spoke. Words felt inadequate in the presence of something so ancient, so deliberate. They stepped through the opening, their lanterns illuminating rough-hewn walls that rose higher than the passage suggested. The floor sloped gently downward, and as they moved, they noticed carved lines, smaller than the ones in the vault, etched with precision into the stone. These were similar in style to the geometric symbols they had traced before, but far more intricate. They formed a labyrinth of triangles, circles, and spirals, all converging toward a central point they could not yet see. At last, the passage widened into a final chamber, the largest and darkest they had encountered. The ceiling arched overhead in a natural dome, irregular yet imposing. At the center of the room, a circular pit had been carved into the stone floor. It was empty now, but remnants of old ash and faint traces of soot clung to its edges, suggesting it had once held fire. Around the pit, concentric rings had been etched into the floor, each filled with symbols and inscriptions too worn to fully decipher. The air in the chamber was heavy, almost alive. Every footstep echoed in unexpected ways, bouncing from wall to wall, floor to ceiling, as though the space itself were aware of their presence. The two researchers stood at the threshold, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on them. The hidden heart of the castle had revealed itself, layer by layer, and yet something remained, something the builders had deliberately left unfinished, awaiting the right moment or the right people to complete it. One of them knelt to examine the floor closer. Faint scratches and grooves formed lines that seemed to connect the outer rings to the pit in the center. As he traced the pattern with his finger, a realization struck both of them at the same time. The entire system, crypt, vault, hidden chamber, and this final pit, was designed for more than observation or ritual. It was a mechanism, an intricate orchestration of light, sound, and movement that could only function when all elements were aligned. People in the vault above, moonlight falling precisely on the table in the hidden chamber, and perhaps the flames or rituals performed in this final pit. The final alignment was more than a calculation of the stars. It was the culmination of the builder's design, a system that transformed the underground chambers into a living, responsive entity. And as they stood there, surrounded by the quiet weight of stone, both researchers understood the responsibility of what they had discovered. This was no longer a purely academic investigation. They had awakened something deliberate, a structure designed to act when the cosmos allowed. And though the system had only partially activated during the moonlight alignment, it had spoken in its own language. The tremor in the floors, the echoes through the dome, the trembling compass needle, and the beams of moonlight tracing their path across the vault. The two men exchanged a glance that needed no words. For centuries, the Black Order who had built the underground chambers had vanished, leaving behind only their design. Yet in that moment, the castle beneath the hill had reminded them that architecture could be immortal, that systems built with precision and intent could outlast the people who created them. They turned to leave, retracing their path through the narrow passage, past the vault, and up the staircase into the crypt. The moonlight outside the castle had shifted, but the night remained clear and still. The silence above ground felt different now, loaded with anticipation, as if the entire hill knew something had changed beneath it. When they finally emerged from the crypt into the moonlit castle grounds, neither spoke immediately. The weight of centuries, of hidden design and untold secrets, pressed heavily on them. Each step back across the stones of the outer courtyard felt like walking on the edge of history. And though the castle seemed calm and ordinary from the outside, both researchers knew the truth. Beneath the hill, the crypt, the vault, and the hidden chambers waited. They were alive in a sense that only the builders had intended, ready to respond to those who understood the system. And the final alignment, the culmination of centuries of planning, was only days away. Somewhere in the shadows of the ancient castle, the heart of the Black Order stirred once more. The night of the final alignment arrived, and the castle seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the wind was calm, and the moon hung high in the sky, casting pale silver light across the stone courtyard. Inside, the underground chambers remained dark and silent, waiting. The two researchers approached the vault with lanterns in hand, their footsteps echoing softly along the staircase that led to the central chamber. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the centuries of secrecy pressed down upon them, reminding them of the magnitude of what they were about to witness. When they entered the circular vault, the moonlight streaming through the small slits in the dome above created thin beams across the engraved geometric lines on the floor. The compass instrument had been carefully positioned on the central platform, the needle perfectly aligned with the eastern line it had traced countless times before. The air in the chamber felt charged, as if the stones themselves recognized the approaching moment. One of the researchers spoke softly, testing the acoustics. His voice rippled through the dome, returning as a delayed echo that merged with the shadows. The resonance was deeper, fuller, more complex than any sound they had experienced in the vault before. The chamber was responding to the night, to the alignment, as though it had been waiting centuries for this precise moment. They moved carefully to their positions along the engraved triangles, just as the instructions in the ancient parchments had described. Every line, every groove on the stone floor now seemed alive, guiding their placement with an almost imperceptible pull. The compass needle trembled slightly, confirming that the system was aware of their presence. Then the moonlight shifted, falling along the first of the lines etched into the stone table in the deeper hidden chamber below. Its silver glow illuminated the symbols, casting delicate shadows across the carvings. The alignment was precise. The beams now intersected with exact points that had been marked centuries ago. The researchers held their breath, feeling the anticipation build within the cold, stone walls of the vault. One of them took a slow breath and spoke a single syllable. The sound expanded through the dome, following the engraved paths of the floor lines. It interacted with the geometry of the chamber, amplifying and bending in ways they had only observed in experiments. The echo returned, but this time it was different, layered, almost conscious, as if the stones themselves were participating in the act of sound. The second researcher joined in, speaking another word, this time from a different line. The echoes merged, creating a resonant harmony that filled the chamber with vibrations. The floor beneath them seemed to pulse subtly in response, the stone transmitting a deep, faint tremor that reached into their bones. Each word, each tone, contributed to a complex symphony the Black Order had designed. Time stretched in the vault. The echoes overlapped and intertwined, creating patterns of sound and vibration that seemed to carry meaning beyond human comprehension. The compass needle shifted with the movement of their voices, confirming that the ancient instrument was more than a mere guide. It was part of the mechanism, a conductor of this unseen symphony. Minutes passed, then a subtle shift occurred. One of the beams of moonlight in the hidden chamber below flickered, illuminating a previously unnoticed symbol on the stone table. The researchers realized it corresponded to the narrow pit in the deepest chamber they had discovered weeks earlier. The room beneath the hill, the chamber with concentric rings, the carved lines, and the faint ash, they all were part of this final alignment. Feeling a mix of fear and awe, the researchers descended through the hidden passage toward the chamber. The moonlight above guided their way, slipping through the narrow shafts and touching the symbols in the pit room. The chamber was darker than the vault, yet it pulsed with a faint energy, a subtle resonance that hinted at the centuries of ritual it had once witnessed. As they entered the pit chamber, the concentric lines seemed to react to their presence. The symbols glowed faintly in the moonlight, each marking a position for sound, movement, or placement of objects. The researchers realized the ancient builders had engineered a full sensory experience, where sound, light, and the human body combined to create something beyond mere ritual, a mechanism that could manipulate perception itself. One researcher carefully placed a stone bowl at the center of the pit, exactly where the carvings indicated. Then he whispered a phrase from the parchment. The echo traveled along the lines, interacting with the geometry, producing a subtle vibration that reached back up through the hill to the vault above. The system was communicating across chambers, responding to action and intention. The second researcher followed suit, adding his own words, layering them over the first. The room thrummed with quiet energy, a symphony of light, sound, and stone, precisely as it had been intended centuries ago. Shadows stretched and shifted across the walls, forming fleeting patterns that seemed almost alive. Every movement of their voices, every breath, caused the chamber to respond, as if acknowledging the presence of the living within the design of the dead. Outside, the moon moved higher, the beams reaching deeper into the symbols, illuminating alignments that had not been visible moments before. The echoes in the vault above strengthened, now perceptible even through the crypt. The two researchers realized the system was activating across multiple layers simultaneously. The crypt, the vault, and the pit chamber were no longer separate. They were components of a single mechanism, brought to life by the perfect convergence of celestial alignment, human presence, and the ancient instruments. As the alignment reached its peak, the chamber seemed to breathe. The faint tremor beneath their feet strengthened slightly, though it remained imperceptible from above ground. The echoes from the vault above returned with increased clarity, forming a network of sound that intertwined with the moonlight patterns below. The Black Order's design was complete, momentarily restored after centuries of silence. The researchers felt a profound awe. They had stepped into history, but history had stepped back into the present with them. The system beneath the hill had awakened, not as a relic, but as a living mechanism. And for those precious minutes, the castle beneath the hill remembered its purpose, its design, and its guardians. The final alignment began to fade as the moon moved past the critical position. The beams of light shifted, the echoes softened, and the compass needle returned to its resting position. The chamber grew quiet once again, yet the energy lingered, a reminder of the awakening they had just witnessed. The system had completed its cycle, and though the researchers had participated, they were still outsiders. The castle's hidden heart remained a mystery beyond full comprehension. As they left the pit chamber and returned to the surface, they glanced back one last time. The hill above seemed tranquil, ordinary even, but beneath it, the vault, the crypt, and the hidden chambers held secrets that had endured for centuries. Secrets waiting for the next alignment, the next activation, the next curious souls bold enough to awaken the system once more. And as the night sky deepened, stars twinkling silently above, the castle watched, patient and eternal, guarding the echoes of a past that refused to be forgotten. The researchers emerged from the hill as the first pale light of dawn touched the castle towers. The air above ground felt colder than the night before, carrying the faint scent of stone and earth, as though the hill itself had exhaled after centuries of silence. Both men were quiet, each lost in thought, aware that what they had witnessed was unlike anything recorded in history books. They had seen the crypt, the vault, the hidden chamber, and the pit awaken in a symphony of sound, light, and design. Yet the knowledge weighed heavily on them. They returned to their notebooks and recordings, documenting every detail they could remember. The vault had revealed itself, the hidden chamber had demonstrated its purpose, and the pit had completed its rare alignment. But the more they wrote, the more they realized how little they truly understood. Every answer seemed to give birth to 10 new questions. The Black Order had built a system beyond mere ritual. It was a mechanism that transcended time, deliberately designed to remain mysterious even to those who discovered it. Days passed and word of their discoveries began to spread through the academic community. Scholars, historians, and curious adventurers visited the castle grounds, seeking to glimpse the vault, the hidden chamber, and the crypt. Yet none could access the deeper pit or replicate the alignment without the precise timing and knowledge the researchers had stumbled upon. The castle, it seemed, guarded its secrets jealously, only yielding them to those who were present at the rare, perfect convergence of moonlight, stars, and human intent. As the researchers reviewed their notes one evening, a subtle unease settled over them. Although the alignment had ended, the castle had left them with a lingering impression of awareness. Sometimes, when they were alone, they swore they could hear faint echoes, the soft vibration of stone responding to their presence. At first, they dismissed it as fatigue or imagination, but the feeling persisted. The castle, in some way, remembered them. One night, months later, they returned to the hill, not to perform any ritual, but to observe. The vault was quiet, the moonlight weak behind drifting clouds. Yet the compass on the central platform seemed to pulse faintly, as though recalling the previous alignment. They did not speak, stepping lightly over the geometric lines, aware of the centuries of history beneath their feet. The faint tremor in the stone underfoot reminded them that this was not simply architecture. It was a living memory, a system that could awaken again at any alignment. Neither man knew who had built the Black Order's chambers with such precision, nor did they know the full purpose behind the ritual sequences, the sound, or the light patterns. The parchments they found contained fragments of knowledge, hints of a philosophy, and instructions designed to preserve secrecy through complexity. The alignment had been rare, yet inevitable. And the castle would continue to wait, patient as stone, until the next time the cosmos itself allowed the mechanism to activate once more. They left the castle one final time, descending the stone stairs to the courtyard bathed in pale dawn. The hill appeared ordinary, but they both knew better. Below the earth, the vault, the crypt, and the hidden chambers remained alive in their own mysterious rhythm, silently counting the movement of the stars, ready for the moment when the alignment would call the system back to life. And though centuries may pass, and generations rise and fall above the hill, the castle beneath it will endure. It will hold its secrets, awaken for those bold enough to stand within its chambers, and remind anyone who dares to listen that some mysteries are never meant to be fully understood. The Black Order's design remains eternal, a haunting testament to a civilization that sought to manipulate space, sound, and time itself. The story ends not with answers but with questions. Who will next awaken the vault? What echoes will return? And what truths are still hidden beneath the hill, waiting for those patient? If you're enjoying this journey, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover more hidden secrets, haunted stories, and thrilling tales just like this one. Don't miss what's coming next. Subscribe now and turn on notifications.